look, if I could give the schools back to Iowa and Idaho and Indiana and all these places that run properly, there's many of them. I think
famously, red states have the highest, have the best educational outcomes. Famously, you know, like the Mississippis, the Alabamas.
so. If you look at the list, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, believe it or not, China's doing very well on that list. A list of well-educated, you know, where they run their school system well.
This is somewhat new, especially from a Republican, consistently pointing to like pure public, like a pure public structure, pointing to Norway and China or any number of different places, and then being like, they're doing so well because their educational outcomes are so much better than ours. It's true. And then trying to undermine public education or completely abolish it, basically, by destroying the federal structure and the funding mechanisms that already exist that are already being mismanaged through multiple decades of austerity and charter schools and privatization is insane. And also, these countries that he's mentioning, whether it's like China, Japan, or Korea, or numerous other Asian countries specifically, when he talks about education, the reason why especially China is so good at education is because it's public and it's well-funded and it's universalized. But there's also still tremendous negative qualities to that level of competitive education. I know this from my experiences growing up in Turkey, where Turkey also has a now limited, but somewhat decent, at least historically somewhat decent public education structure all the way up to college. And as long as you take the national tests, both moving from 8th grade into high school, where you take the first national test that you need to take, like a standardized test, and then moving on from high school to college, you take a second standardized test, you can get into the top institutions. The best education that you can get in Turkey, at least when I was growing up, was still in public schools. They were incredibly competitive. And that competition, of course, was still burdensome for young minds. It was still very difficult. So there are issues in these countries as well. There are issues in publicly funded education systems as well. The issues are the unimaginable amount of cramming that you need to do in terms of studies. You got to go to cram school, basically. You have to go to extra school after school and like specifically study for this test. There's so much stress involved in it. It's definitely not good for people's brains, especially when they're developing. They're under tremendous pressure, tremendous stress. So there are issues in those structures as well. But the major reasons as to why they have significantly better educational outcomes than we do is because it's funded and it's public and it's not pay to win. Funding has nothing to do with how poorly educated the USA is, law. No, brother. Funding absolutely has something to do with it. Yes, the cost per pupil is very high in the United States of America. This is true. It's a matter of where that money is going. It's a matter of the public-private partnership. And it's more so a matter of how those funds are utilized. A lot of those funds, since the 90s, by way of the Democrats and the Republicans alike, have been going to charter schools. The educational standards in the United States of America are piss poor. Schools also spend a shit ton of money on their sports programs before they spend it on actual education, having smaller classrooms, having better paid teachers with more time off, having more teachers, or even something as simple as food. The American education structure is so fundamentally broken, especially within the public education system. It's so messed up. You're braving the elements every step of the goddamn way. And there are things that people don't even comprehend that play a major role in students not getting quality education. Things like school lunches not being free. Things like not having proper air conditioning or proper heating inside of classrooms or the sizes of classrooms. These are massively consequential issues that we don't even address or think about. That's before we get to mass shootings and shit. Why China banned homework?
You wake up at 5:30 in the morning. You scarf down breakfast on the way to school. You do 30 minutes of mandatory military-style exercise. Then at 7 o'clock sharp, the real work begins. Chinese class, then English, math, and so on. You sit still, respond when asked questions, and quietly, obediently memorize character after character, fact after fact. Officially, school ends at 5:15 p.m., but don't plan on relaxing just yet. After an hour for dinner, 2 if you're lucky, it's time for the next phase of your day, private tutoring. You sit in a room not unlike the one you just...
Yeah. Also, China literally banned, I think this video is straight up completely false, lol. Didn't China recently ban private tutoring? I mean, you can still get it, but like a couple years ago, yeah, they banned it 4 years ago. I guess it's not so recent. I'm so glad that Massachusetts passed the millionaires class, so every kid, including mine, can have free lunches and breakfast every day. Yeah, that's a huge problem, dude. Like especially when you're growing up and you don't have access to food, that's genuinely consequential. Heating and cooling in classrooms not being adequate is a massive consequence to your learning experience. It's stupid shit like that. People think it's all because the teachers suck or whatever. Ironically enough, everybody I think knows that people don't get into teaching in this country because they want to make money. They get into teaching because that is their passion. That I think also creates a different issue. If you're a teacher and you're constantly burdened by the stress of your finances, you're also going to offer substandard education. It's normal. You're human. No matter how passionate you are, if you're constantly stressing about your finances, that's probably going to burden you. It's probably going to play a role as well. It's death by 1,000 cuts, where the entire system is designed to make these awful substandard outcomes in terms of educational attainment in this country. Yeah, the most popular television program, award-winning television program, is quite literally about a teacher, a chemistry teacher, that gets cancer and then becomes a meth kingpin in this country. Unironically, in a social democracy, that premise doesn't exist. You get that? That premise doesn't exist at all, because in any other competent social democracy or any other competent government, the teacher has an issue with cancer, and then the cancer treatment is paid for. We're over here talking about like, oh, look at Norway and China. Their education is so much better. Why can't we do this? That's why we need to continue accelerating the public-private partnership that guts public education.
To some of these states that are really well-run states, they would be as good as Denmark and Norway and Sweden and some of the other states.
What's the one thing about these countries that he's presenting? What's the one thing that you can point to in these nations, man? I can't seem to place my finger on it. No, it's not that they're white. He also talked about China too. It's not about white versus non-white. Chatters, get the out of here. No, it's not low population. He mentioned China. China breaks all of these arguments. The notion of homogeny is such a stupid one, because cultural assimilation is complete by the third generation. The notion that this is like, oh, it's because we just have too many different cultures in America is stupid. No, everybody becomes a goddamn American by the second generation, and they're completely American, hogified by the third. Stop with this nonsense. There are 40 recognized ethnic groups in China. People think it's one culture because no American ever learns about the country. Yeah. I was going to do Teach for America and wanted to teach at a public school, but ended up being railroaded into teaching a subject that I didn't want at a charter school with garbage work-life balance, no union, and super rigid rules for both teachers and students, so I ended up quitting. The incentives for people to go into teaching are so terrible that even people who want to teach are ultimately discouraged from doing so. Yep. This is awesome. They had a choice of to become a teacher or something else, ... How much is enough? Getting paid for working for 9 months out of the year, having a defined benefit, retirement, and full health care are all great perks. This guy coming in hot, dude. We're giving our teachers too much. That's a good take, man. You're right. You know who are the real leeches on society? Our teachers and our fucking nurses, dude. The real leeches. The real parasites in contemporary American society. Teachers are out here literally working 2 jobs, sometimes 3, in order to make ends meet. And this guy's like, they're just getting paid too much. They already have good enough benefits, dude. Sweet here. Our school system is more municipal than state run. This was a change that happened in the 1990s. However, it's still all publicly funded. There are private schools, however, they're also paid for by the municipality and is allowed to make profit and not reinvested into the school. Yeah, except in Sweden, they tried to move into privatization, recognized that that actually led to worse educational attainment overall, worse educational outcomes overall, and quickly scrapped that idea. This happened, I think, like 2 decades ago at this point, or a decade ago. I remember reading about it. So Sweden is actually a very famous case study for trying to privatize it further and then realizing that that shit was a ginormous failure. It'll come back. It'll come back because that's how capital works. Capital, ironically, is a parasitic force. Capital, ironically, is, does all of the things that you think teachers are doing, I guess. So even if there is a privatization initiative and it fails once, that doesn't mean people who want to seek out profit in that sector are going to stop. They're not going to be like, all right, I guess we were wrong. Oops, my bad. That's not how this works at all. They're going to come back stronger, harder, and try to privatize again and again and again. As long as capital exists, they will always, as long as capitalism exists, there will always be capital owners that seek out profits in every socialized sector. That is ultimately the goal. Picking apart the government and picking apart state-funded institutions for scraps, privatizing it, and then turning it into for-profit institutions. Things like education should not be for-profit. Things like healthcare should not be for-profit. You don't have to be a socialist to recognize this. Things like housing should not be for-profit. That last part is the hardest one to get people to understand, unfortunately. I think, regardless of my worldview, these are areas of agreement with the overwhelming majority of Western society. You see what I'm saying? I have a different vision for how society must be run. Having said that, however, in the interim period, I'm perfectly capable of making marginal improvements. And those marginal improvements revolve around things like improving education. The exact opposite of what Trump is doing, of course, which is making education worse overall, because he's interested in one thing and one thing only, which is to create profits for his buddies, create avenues of profit for his buddies. Yeah, this is the famous Matt Damon clip.
There isn't job security, right? There's an incentive to work hard and be a better actor because you want to have a job. So why isn't it like that for teachers?
Do you think job insecurity is what makes me work hard?
Well, you have an incentive to work harder, but if there's job security...
Be an actor. It's not an incentive. That's the thing. See, you take this MBA-style thinking, right? It's the problem with ed policy right now. There's this intrinsically paternalistic view of problems that are much more complex than that. It's like saying a teacher is going to get lazy when they have tenure. A teacher wants to teach. I mean, why else would you take a shitty salary and really long hours and do that job unless you really love to do it?
10% that are bad, though? 10% of teachers are bad.
Where'd you get that number?
I don't know. 10% of people in any profession maybe should think of something else.
Well, okay, but I mean, maybe you're a shitty cameraman. I don't know.
Maybe you're a shitty cameraman. I don't know. Guy immediately on the spot. Reason is a libertarian think tank, by the way, for those of you who don't know. But libertarian cameraman on the spot makes up a fact. Classic. And then, like, that fact is also completely irrelevant to the point of contention here. That fact is utterly irrelevant. What do you mean 10% of teachers are bad? Let's say 10% of teachers are bad. I don't even know what the standards are for bad, right? But does that mean that they should not be paid? Like, what are we talking about? Every goddamn person in this country is just like so predisposed with maxing out efficiency, not realizing that they themselves are also probably bad on certain aspects of their job. Working at a public school is so incredibly scary. I dealt with shooter threats at least once a month and had to do 4 different jobs on minimum wage. I was a substitute secretary and was therefore a nurse, a substitute detention teacher, receptionist, and crossing guard on minimum wage. There are so many things to do and you're paid barely enough to survive. Here in Denmark, we get paid to go to school when we turn 18, and the same on uni. We get even paid more money if we continue there. Like, I'm 20 and I have my own apartment, live alone, and have a cat and got no work. I can live like this because I get paid going to school. They're pooping on us. Okay, Denmark, watch out. We're coming for you anyway, okay? Don't worry. You'll get to experience that sweet, delicious American freedom soon, okay? This is unironically the American attitude, by the way, which is that they have nicer things than us because they have some degree of socialization, okay, and some social safety nets. So we must take that away by force. That's it. We just our job here is to everything up because we couldn't cut it. We couldn't be normal.
So we're at the bottom of the list, and we're the most expensive. We're at the top of the list when it comes to cost per pupil. We spend more money per pupil than any other nation in the world, and yet we're rated number 40. The last ratings came out, you saw them. So they talk about 40 countries. We're rated number 40. And I say that if we did this, we would...
Dude, every problem in the United States of America is directly a consequence of like Republicans fucking it up and then Democrats not fixing it. And then going, you know what we need to do? More of the fucking up of the system. That'll fix it. It's insane. To the outsiders looking in, they're like, what are you guys doing? They're like, oh, we have a problem. I always use gun control as an argument here because it's like the most obvious one, right? It's such a funny, if not incredibly tragic, but at this point we're in gallows humor territory, so funny situation. It's like America is the only developed nation with a massive problem, gun violence, right? Massive. It's the only developed nation that has this issue. And obviously, the reason why other countries don't have this issue is because guns are not readily available for purchase. Okay? They don't have more guns in circulation than they have people in other countries. And every single year, mass shootings increase, school shootings increase, they get more severe, they get more violent. And American leadership looks at that and goes, you know what would solve this problem? More guns. But it doesn't exist elsewhere to the same degree. So how can you look at that and be like, you know what's actually, you know what the solution to the problem is? The thing that's creating the problem and more of it. It's the same with our criminal justice system. We have an issue in the United States of America with recidivism. The likelihood of a prisoner leaving prison, reoffending, and going back to prison. It's really high. Now, other countries have lower rates of recidivism. Why do they have lower rates of recidivism? Well, it's because their prison structure is not focused on consistently keeping people locked up and in jail with no ways of reintegration into society. But Americans look at that problem in a country that houses a quarter of the entire planet's incarcerated population, despite only making up 4% of the entire planet's population. The United States of America, remember, houses a quarter of the entire prison population on the planet. We are insanely focused on draconian measures in terms of crime and punishment. And in that country, we look to this issue of recidivism, the likelihood for prisoners to reoffend once they're released into public, and we say, you know what the solution to that is? Lowering the crime rate? More of the same problem. More cruel prisons, larger prisons, privatized prisons. And the same is happening here in education. Other countries we look to have obviously a higher degree of socialization when it comes to their public education initiatives. They have better funding and a more efficient structure. They're not interested in eking out profits whichever way they can, or at least the regulatory structure has been able to push back on the profit-seeking mentality by capital owners. And then we say, you know what the solution is? More privatization, more decentralization. It makes no sense. The entirety of the American political structure revolves around looking at an issue, looking at the problems that cause that issue to exist, and then saying the only solution is more of the problems that cause that issue to exist. It is crazy. We look at a fire and we go, you know what will fix this fire? More kerosene. That's it. That's the only method we have. And it's so insane. I work in public transit advocacy, and 90% of the arguments I hear against it are, we can't invest more in public transport because the current system is shit. Read underfunded. Exactly. Oh, goddamn Ronald Reagan, burning in hell right now, okay? Starving the beast, baby. It's funny because we do this to other countries by force through the IMF and World Bank, right? We give them loans that have horrible conditions with massive rates of interest. And then when we demand a return on that investment, we demand it by way of austerity. Here in the United States, we don't have the World Bank or the IMF. We just do it to ourselves. Socialist, classic socialist, blaming everything on Reagan? No, I don't think this is entirely Reagan's fault, but he certainly supercharged it. I mean, I've routinely also criticized not just Ronald Reagan, but Carter as well. and I understand the problem is capitalism. It's just that Ronald Reagan is as close to a singular force of neoliberalism as you can get to. If your argument is that it's a far larger systemic issue than Ronald Reagan, I agree with you. Ronald Reagan is as close to this issue as you can get, is the closest responsible party as you can blame a singular person. Is Reagan America's Thatcher? Yes.
Do that with an executive order, sir, or do you need to work with Congress?
Well, there are some people that say I could. I think I'd work with Congress. I think we'd have to work with the teachers union, because the teachers union is the only one that's opposed to it. Nobody else would want to hold them back. Look, we have to tell the teachers union, we're rated last in the world in education of the top 40. We're rated last. We were 38. Now we're 40. We went to 30, now we went to 40. We're 37, but we're at 40 now. The thing just came out.
I wonder why it got worse. You want your teachers to be well funded and not burdened by financial troubles, dude. You want them to have the best benefits. These are the guardians that are taking care of our children. These are the people that are shaping the next generation of Americans. They have a profoundly important job. I can't believe I have to sit here and say these things that should be the most obvious things on the planet. It is alarming that I even have to make an argument for it, and yet I do consistently, and people still don't understand. They have a profoundly important duty. What are we doing here? In my experience, teachers just sit on their ass rather than teach effectively. It's one of the reasons for poor performance in children in school. Lack of interest comes from lack of passion from teacher. I thought this community was older, man. I can't have this conversation with like mostly 14-year-olds. I'm sorry. I mean, judging passion is so stupid. I can't do this. Like, I don't know. I don't know what your individual experience is with your one teacher who's just not passionate. What I'm simply stating is, if you want the best possible people for the job, you're going to have to pay better. That's it. Everybody understands this. Everybody deep down inside understands this reality. That's it. That's all I'm saying is you got to teach, you got to pay better. You got to make sure that teachers have better benefits, and you will unironically have the next generation get better education overall. Not to say that like there aren't any bad teachers right now. It doesn't matter that there are bad teachers right now. Do you see what I'm saying? There are people who do a bad job in every profession.
Guy walking around and just sees somebody waiting for the train. Train's coming 40 miles an hour, and he gets pushed into the subway.
Also, the other part about this like subway murder stuff is like, put some gates on the subways, man. But that's socialism. That's communism. You know, can't do that. Hey guys, we can't actually put gates on the subways. We can't do that. Something that virtually exists in every country. Can't do that. Okay. We have to abolish public transit instead. Public infrastructure is woke. If you want teachers to get paid better, then private education is the only option. No, I want the standards and job security to be raised for public education to reach the level of private education. That's so stupid. You're literally not understanding the argument I'm making. The argument I'm making is that we have to make sure that public education is better overall. That's the whole point. It's too much government funding. Taxpayers shouldn't take that burden. Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay, well then you'll always sit around wondering why Norway has a better educational outcome than the United States of America, okay? You'll just consistently wonder why, oh why, do these other countries have significantly better educational outcomes than the United States of America? There you go. If you're asking me why that is the case, and I'm telling you why that is the case, and I'm telling you what the solution is, and you go and say, well, the solution is too costly for the taxpayer, then okay, so you just don't have any interest in fixing it. America's like a sinking ship, and there are just too many holes to plug. And a lot of the issues actually are related to one another. A lot of issues actually contribute to the broader problem in general. You try to plug one hole, there's another hole that pops up right above it. Try to plug that, there's a third. The entire mentality behind I'm not raising my taxes, you, unironically also stems from the reality that no one believes that the government is ever going to do right by them. That's it. How do you think we got there? How do you think this attitude manifested? Do you see what I'm saying? We got here because of what I was describing. We got here where there's no confidence, whatsoever in the government actually doing right by the population. So it's much easier to advocate for starving it further. If you don't believe the government is actually giving you anything, and most of that money is, in your mind, I don't know, going to baby murder machines and subsidizing industries that don't even actually adjust prices in times of need for you, then yeah, you're like, why am I paying taxes anyway? That's why so many Americans are anti-tax in general. Nobody likes to pay taxes, but at least in other countries, in like competent social democracies, which are also being undermined by the same influence of capital, the parasitic leech nature of capital owners, at least they have an understanding that like, oh, well, these taxes are going to social safety nets, and I think it's valuable to pay into it because who knows what might happen to me one day. And I would rather not be like America. That's the way that they that's the way that people understand it. Show the Carmel High video to see what could be possible. Check my log. I've been spamming it. Okay, dude. Here, my tax evasion accountant wants me to desperately watch the Carmel High video for you guys.
Welcome to Carmel High School. Join us on a tour. This is the auditorium.
This is the commons.
This is the catwalk. This is the planetarium.
This is senior hallway. This is our Carmel High School library.
This is the Carmel Cafe and Market.
This is the auto shop.
This is the wood shop.
Main cafeteria.
This is our 3-story freshman center.
This is CHTV.
This is our live radio.
This is the yearbook room. And this is the Carmel Varsity Gym.
This is the new addition to the Hall of Fame. This is the freshman gym. This is the weight room.
This is the wrestling room, baby.
Yeah, you want to know why it's like this? Because it's an incredibly wealthy neighborhood. Yeah, this is Indiana, and it's also located in one of the wealthiest cities in the country. It looks like this because of private donors, not because the Indiana public school system is thriving. I know. It's not just private donors, though. It's also because of the way that taxation works. If you live in a high-income neighborhood, then you're paying higher property taxes. And, well, I don't know how it works in Indiana, but that's how it is in LA, for example, in California. And the higher property taxes that you pay for immediately go back to funding these schools. And that creates a major issue with underfunded areas. The Chicago public school system is a glaringly obvious example of this, okay? One of the greatest examples of that wealth disparity. Illinois and the Chicago exurb suburbs have some decent schools. The Chicago public school system, on the other hand, is awful. And the reason why it's awful is because, lo and behold, the overwhelming majority of black and brown students inside of the state of Illinois goes to the Chicago public school system. And they're coming from very poor neighborhoods. Those very poor neighborhoods are not capable of funding the public school system. And a competent state government or a competent federal government is supposed to look at that disparity and say, we need to desperately fund these schools and fix them. The Chicago public school system is in a dire state. Classrooms are ginormous. Teachers are having to teach 40 students at a time. That's impossible to contend with. Schools are also in desolate conditions too. Like straight up, they just look like schools from a dystopia, okay? They look like a zombie apocalypse hit it and kids are still trying to go there. No after-school programs or very limited after-school programs. And then we wonder why kids that go through that structure don't actually, do anything positive. Bernie Sanders has talked about this with healthcare. There is an 8-year gap in like when people die in this country between the 1% and the rest of the country. Wealthy people in this country live on average 8 years longer. That's almost a decade longer, man. That's a decade longer in life expectancy. Think about that disparity. It's insane. Do you think it is a consequence of culture or racial superiority? Or do you think it's a consequence of wealth disparity? It's wealth disparity, by the way. That is the answer. I'm not even going to let you entertain the other stuff. It is always and forever and always will be wealth disparity. With Kennedy, they might not make it to 5 years old. Yeah, I mean, yes. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the great unifier, okay? He's the great equalizer where he will make it illegal to vaccinate your children and then you'll die regardless, okay? Everyone get cholera. Raw milk only, okay?
This is the blue and gold gym. This is the blue and gold track.
This is the field house.
This is the varsity tunnel. This is the bookstore.
This is one of the many cooking rooms at Marvel.
I just don't like Americans are so brain rotted by capitalism that they think like, no, the only way we can reach this is through profiteering, through a profit incentivized structure. And it's so insane. They do this with like the US Postal Service too. It's like, no, man, it's not supposed to be for profit. You're delusional. You are so goddamn stupid. Some things, can we just agree collectively? You don't have to be a card carrying Marxist Leninist, okay? You can just agree that some things are not supposed to be for profit. Improving the quality of education for every single student, no matter which zip code they come from, no matter what finance they come from, is going to yield better outcomes for this fucking country. And I can't seemingly find people to understand this reality. I don't know how to explain it any further than I have. And if you make education a for-profit entity, then you arrive at this massive disparity. And then you sit around and you go, why is everyone so stupid? Why is everyone devoid of critical thinking skills? How do we get here? I wonder how. Because a literal pipe dream? Yeah, it's a literal pipe dream. So what's the solution? Give everyone millions of dollars? Is that what I said? Wealth distribution doesn't have to happen at the individual level, man. Americans are so goddamn hyper individualistic. They can't even imagine government programs. They think like, when I say wealth redistribution and improving the material conditions of all Americans across the board, they think, oh, just give me $10,000, please. That's not what I'm saying. I'm describing it in the process of schooling. Funding public education better is the solution. I am describing you the solution. You're just not hearing it. What do you mean? So what is the solution? That was my question. I've already given you the answer. You're just refusing to hear it. It's not a pipe dream because it already exists in other countries, chatter. And of course, this is the part of the process where you say, well, Norway is homogenous, or and then I say China is not homogenous, and you say you don't know anything about China because you've only read like insane shit about how they're harvesting the organs of like children at schools or something. I've had this conversation a million times over. We can have it again if you want. Cultural homogeny has nothing to do with educational attainment, okay? There are plenty of diverse nations out there that yield more positive educational outcomes than the United States of America, Canada being a great example of this, as a matter of fact. It's just money. The solution is just wealth disparity and fixing it. Yeah, Cuba, another great example. Cuba is an incredibly poor nation and also not even remotely homogenous, very diverse nation, and yet they have tremendously better outcomes in educational attainment. It's not just money. It absolutely is. It's the most important part of the problem. It's the most significant part of the problem. And anyone that tells you that it's not is actually just directing your attention away, either because they're deluded. Oh, you can't just use money as a problem solver. The other route in this argument is, well, there's still going to be people that don't want to actually do good education, even if like the schools are better funded. And that's not how the government works. It's not about literally making sure by force every single individual is maxing out their potential, okay? It's about getting as many people as possible to max out their potential. And right now we're working in the opposite direction. I'm hoping for a reset, a cultural shift, a shift in attitude, a shift in government. And yes, money is everything, especially in this process, especially when we're looking at an American school that is well funded. But of course, for our ruling class, a well-educated proletariat is a genuine threat, because if you're better educated, you're better equipped. I'll give you another example from immigration. ICE and that homunculus Thomas Homan has been chirping nonstop in general to mainstream outlets, right-wing mainstream resources, over and over again about how the radical leftists have been teaching undocumented immigrants how to avoid the authorities. And they're genuinely crying that the radical leftists and the Antifa are teaching undocumented migrants their rights. That's what they're upset about, because they can't dominate them as hard as they want to when the people that they're trying to dominate, the people that they're trying to like break into the homes of, are well equipped with the limited amount of rights that they have in that process that the American government offers them. Isn't that crazy? Because they don't want you to be educated. That's it. Whether you're an undocumented migrant or a documented U.S. citizen, they just don't want you to be educated. They don't want you to be educated about your rights. They don't want you to be educated in general about what to do. They don't want you to exercise critical thinking skills. They don't want you to know that knowledge is power, not to, get all Sigma Grindset on your ass. They want you to be stupid. because a stupid population is servile. A stupid population can be used and abused. A stupid population looks at planes falling out of the fucking sky and thinks, oh, this has nothing to do with air traffic control being consistently underfunded and forcing like 8 dudes to sit in a tower and do the job of like 40. That's probably not going to cause problems. You know what'll cause the real problems? DEI. And if you're stupid, that shit hits hard as like, God damn, you're right. Them blacks are working in the air traffic control and they're disabled. And I think that's the reason why. And it has nothing to do with the fact that now we're forcing 6 guys to do the job of 40. And you can't even translate that to your own immediate circumstances too, because that kind of austerity and that kind of profit seeking exists in every sector. So whether you're working in construction or whether you're working as a nurse or whether you're working as a goddamn teacher or whether you're working in any sector whatsoever, you probably are experiencing that in your daily life. The fact that your boss has fired some of the workforce and is now making you do the work of others that used to do that. Your burden is higher now at your job place, okay, at your job site. And if you can understand that in your immediate life, how can you not figure out that there is literally that exact same problem that exists in all of these other sectors as well, whether it be ATC, air traffic control, or any number of different regulatory agencies?